You're listening to The World at 8 with Lynn Mozart. The World at 8, the number one in nationalist news.
Highlights of the news today, Wednesday the 10th of April. Those criminals mainstream news will not report. Rapist to receive damages after his human rights were breached. Sex groomer jailed for attacks on vulnerable women. Why it's better to grow up in Slovenia than Britain. Bordeaux vineyards to dry up by 2050. Dawn clash with Roma during raid on Kalamata Hospital days after video challenge. A defining moment. 6 Alinsky rules that explain Obama's words and deeds. US Army labelled evangelicals, Catholics, examples of religious extremism. Thought for the day, still a class divide? And finally, something wriggly this way comes. UK news. Those criminals mainstream news will not report. Tower Hamlets Council social worker Soifar Rahman, 59, jailed for molesting girl and her mother. Rahman forced a 10-year-old girl to strip naked before molesting her, and her mother has been jailed for 8 years. Glory Benjamin, 35, accused of sex trafficking as girl forced into prostitution under JUJU curse. Benjamin is accused of being part of a network of West African people traffickers which used JUJU rituals to terrify the girl into silence. Metropolitan Police Officer Davider Bajwa, 35, jailed for attempting to cover up attack by employee of his taxi firm. Bajwa deliberately lied to colleagues in a bid to cover up an attack by an employee at his taxi firm. Taxi controller Harbhajan Gang hit cyclist Mark Harding with a broom handle after he drunkenly complained about being given the wrong directions. Dr. Dirk Hohmann, crooked German doctor, guilty of misconduct. Hohmann, a German doctor, lied about his fraud convictions to get a job in Britain, and he's been struck off. He was able to work as a consultant on the Isle of Man on a £150,000 a year salary for 5 years before his criminal ways finally caught up with him. Rapist to receive damages after his human rights were breached. A convicted rapist and paedophile is to receive damages from the British government after a European court found his human rights had been breached. Mustafa Abdi, a Somali national who was jailed for 8 years in 1998 for rape and indecency with a child, was unlawfully detained for 2.5 years as he awaited deportation, the European Courts of Human Rights has said. The Strasbourg court said this was a breach of Article 5, his right to liberty and security, and has ordered the UK government to pay €1,500, that is £1,277, in damages, and €7,000, £5,960, for his lawyer's costs and expenses. And yup, you guessed it, he's still here. Sex groomer jailed for attacks on vulnerable women. A predatory sex groomer who plied his vulnerable victims with neat vodka before abusing them has been jailed for almost 8 years. Kasim Inayet sexually assaulted a 15-year-old schoolgirl he persistently followed in his car and 2 women with mental health difficulties, molesting one and raping the other. Bradford Crown Court heard yesterday. Yesterday, Chief Superintendent Angela Williams, Airedale and North Bradford Divisional Commander, said, "This is the second trial in a matter of weeks specifically relating to child sexual exploitation and really represents our focus on bringing the perpetrators of these crimes to justice." This latest sentence should therefore serve as further warning to others that we will not tolerate this behaviour in West Yorkshire, and those involved will experience the same fate. His barrister, Catherine Blackwell QC, said Inayet was battling alcohol and cocaine and that made him behave in an unacceptable way towards women. European news. Why it's better to grow up in Slovenia than Britain. Underage drinking and teen pregnancies put the United Kingdom 16th out of 29 nations in UN survey. The United Nations ranked Britain at the bottom half of a league table of the best places to be a child, below the likes of Slovenia, the Czech Republic and Portugal. Despite being the 7th richest nation in the world, Britain had the worst rates of youngsters entering further education and ranked second from bottom for teenage pregnancy rates. Education Minister David Laws said the report revealed how Labour had failed children. By the time Labour left power, this report concludes that our education system was not up to scratch, and we had some of the highest proportions of 15 and 19-year-olds not in education, employment or training anywhere in the developed world. The UK is one of only 3 major countries with teenage pregnancy rates of more than 30 per 1,000, and one of the 3 which saw rates rise over the course of the last decade. France, Bordeaux vineyards to dry up by 2050. A new report published this week spells bad news for lovers of French wine. The study predicts global warming will nearly wipe out production in the traditional regions of Bordeaux and the Rhone Valley by the year 2050. Oh, I am an unhappy bunny. Golden Dawn clash with Roma during raid on Kalamata hospital days after video challenge. Members of Kalamata's Roma community in the southern Peloponnese on Monday night nearly came to blows with a group of ultranationalist Golden Dawn members who were at the local general hospital demanding identification papers from private nurses to determine whether they were Greek or foreign, local media reported on Tuesday. Golden Dawn, which was elected into Parliament in June on an anti-migrant platform, has been raiding hospitals around the country in a bid to locate foreign workers and applied pressure on hospital administrations to ban them from working. On Monday, a group of Roma men had brought a 22-year-old member of their community into the Kalamata General Hospital with injuries, which they said had been a result of racially motivated attack. When they saw the Golden Dawn representatives, which included MP Demetrios Koukoutsis, they accused them of inciting the attack and nearly came to blows with Golden Dawn members. Hospital security staff called in the police to help break up the scuffle. World at 8 says, well, over here you'd have a hard job finding a non-ethnic person working in a hospital. World news, a defining moment. While many British left and many nationalists celebrate, the world remembers the Iron Lady. From the Daily Mail we hear Baroness Thatcher's death unleashed a wave of vitriol and hatred from the left. The first of several planned Thatcher death parties across the country began last night with more than 200 revellers gathering in Brixton, South London. They danced the conga, drank champagne and chanted, "Maggie, Maggie, dead, dead, dead." It's a wonder the poor dears could afford champagne. If their poor parents hadn't had Thatcher, they probably still couldn't. The Scottish Parliament caused outrage by refusing to mark Baroness Thatcher's death by flying its flags at half-mast. From the self-proclaimed British Resistance, The Bitch is Dead, written by Kazreddin, The One Party I Do Not Want to Miss by The Green Arrow. Nick Griffin, BNP chairman, tweeted, "Conned into thinking the EU was about money rather than ruthless federalism, she still towered above the rest." Another tweet, "War though, conned into flawed giant." And another, "Mrs Thatcher a disaster for working class and Britain's coal and manufacturing industries, but she held her nerve like a true leader in the Falkland." France is in need of a dose of Thatcherism. After the death of Margaret Thatcher, there's been much talk in France about the impact of her economic policies on the UK. Paris-based Professor of Economics Tomasz Michalski tells The Local why France could do with its own dose of Thatcherism. The Good Life from Canada Free Press said, "Conviction. Thatcher and Reagan convinced millions that they were fighting for the good life, and they delivered." In today's political world, the missing element is conviction. When Conservatives remember Thatcher and Reagan, they hear the echoes of clear and principled messages. Neither of them were perfect as politicians, but their rhetoric was perfect because they knew that they believed, said it clearly and colourfully, and enjoyed themselves doing it. One of our World at 8 writers comments, "The defining article for me was in Tuesday's Daily Express entitled Ronald Reagan, Margaret Thatcher was my dearest friend. I did not come to the UK until a few years after Maggie lost leadership of the Conservative Party. I did not live here under her leadership, but in spite of the poll tax, union breaking, mine closures and everything else you like to fault and despise her for doing, Britain ceased being great when this titan was gone from British politics. Reagan, Thatcher and Gorbachev saw the fall of the Iron Curtain. Reagan supported Thatcher in the Falklands. Thatcher stood up to Reagan over Grenada. The council tax should have been supplemented by the poll tax. The unions were and remain too powerful, useless and redundant, their original purpose long forgotten in the emerging I want, I deserve culture rather than I earned culture. The mine closures were the mark of good steward. Any good businessman will rid themselves of business that costs more than it returns. On a cold November day in 1963, I was 12 years old and sitting in my 6th grade class in a Mississippi schoolroom when our teacher was called from the room. A few minutes later she returned to announce the president is dead. He was shot in Dallas. Before she finished, the whole room burst into cheers and shouts of joy. No one was shouting or cheering more than I. Mrs. Leftwich, the teacher, shouted "Stop, stop," the only time I ever heard her raise her voice. Sternly she raised her voice. "He was our president," and softer, "He was your president." With sadness she said, "Remember that." My friends and colleagues remember what was lost in 1990 when the Iron Lady was forcibly retired from her political career. And remember what this nation lost on Monday, the 8th of April 2013. Its dignity. 6 Alinsky rules that explain Obama's words and deeds. In spite of the media's conspicuous silence on the matter, it's no secret that Saul Alinsky's manual for community organisers, Rules for Radicals, exerted an immeasurable influence over the world's most well-recognised community organiser, President Barack Obama. Thus, to understand why Obama does what he does, we need to be familiar with the vision that Alinsky delineated in his book. Below are 6 ideas, 6 rules, that the godfather of community organising packs between the covers of rules, ideas that Obama's imbibed hook, line and sinker. 1. Politics is all about power relations, but to advance one's power one must couch one's position in the language of morality. 2. There is only 3 kinds of people in the world: rich and powerful oppressors, the poor and disenfranchised oppressed, and the middle class whose apathy perpetuates the status quo. 3. Change is brought about through relentless agitation and troublemaking of a kind that radically disrupts society as it is. 4. There can be no conversation between the organiser and his opponents. The latter must be depicted as being evil. 5. The organiser can never focus on just a single issue. He must move inexhaustibly from one issue to the next. 6. Taunt one's opponents to the point that they label you a dangerous enemy of the establishment. US Army labelled evangelicals, Catholics, as examples of religious extremism. The US Army listed evangelical Christianity and Catholicism as examples of religious extremism, along with Al-Qaeda and Hamas, during a briefing with an Army Reserve unit based in Pennsylvania, Fox News has learned. "We find this offensive to have evangelical Christians and the Catholic Church to be listed among known terrorist groups," said Ron Cruz, Executive Director of the Chaplain Alliance for Religious Liberty. "It is dishonourable for any US military entity to allow this type of wrong-headed characterisation." The incident occurred during an Army Reserve Equal Opportunity training brief on extremism. Topping the list is evangelical Christianity. Other organisations listed include Catholicism, Al-Qaeda, Hamas, the Ku Klux Klan, Sunni Muslims and the Nation of Islam. The military also listed Islamophobia as a form of religious extremism. Thought for the day. Still a class divide? If you listen to all the rhetoric floating around on the death of Baroness Thatcher, you'd be right in thinking that the good old class system is alive and well and living in the UK, even amongst people who pride themselves on adopting all their own people, white people, under their wing. This is clearly not the case. It would seem the average working class Brit, if there is even such a person existing nowadays, would rather give vent over a dead member of their own tribe than resent the thousands of other tribes now over here and working against just these people. Now, without stepping into the snake pit here, there are always 2 sides to a coin. And if anyone thinks they are absolutely right, they are usually only part right. No one solely is right over what has happened in the past. We are all subject to seeing history from our own point of view. That's life. Putting ourselves in somebody else's shoes is not usually what human beings do. That's why, despite being a committed, not committable nationalist, there are some nationalist views which even I don't subscribe to. It doesn't make me a bad nationalist or a traitor to nationalism. It makes me me and not you. The subject of the demise of Baroness Thatcher opened a can of worms because, like all political parties and indeed inhabitants of these sceptred isles, There is a huge north-south divide and a people not necessarily class divided but still splitting towns, homes and families apart. As I said and will maintain, there are always two sides or more to a coin, especially the old threepenny piece. My comments on Maggie were personal ones, and I hope she's reunited with Dennis, who was a charmer, albeit after a couple of G&Ts, but that's my opinion only. You have to remember that 100 years ago Maggie would not have made it to government, and many might say that would have been a good thing, but would it? For one thing, she was female, and to my knowledge the nearest any Labour female got to fame was the immense Bessie Braddock, who was awful to look at and listen to, despite her obvious abilities, and Barbara Castle, who made it through the Labour ranks of a second-rate casting couch. Maggie made it through despite not having wealthy cushioned parents, an upper public school education and friends in Jobs for the Boys Club. She was middle class going on from working class, and at least should be admired for her tenacity and drive in her time. In fact, during her days at the helm I was busy having children and raising them, so all the whims and wherefores of the then incumbent government were just noise on the news for the most part. Me, like thousands of people, merely accepted the will of the people because they, and our kith and kin, voted her in. She didn't get in by being a dictator or by the will of the armed forces or lost postal votes. She got in because we were all sick and tired of bathing our babies by candlelight and using newspapers for bog rolls. Get real. The unions ruled us even down south in the dark days of a 3-day week and strikes and no sodding bread. Labour and unions have a lot to answer for in that they turned what is in reality a socialist country and its people back into conservatives. Edward Heath now, there was a man, or what passes for one, that deserves hatred for his EU games and much more. But did he get any vitriol when he passed? No, because he was male and weak. Now, I'm not a woman's libber, but I have noticed the attitude of people changes with the sex of the person concerned. In politics, a man and a woman can do the same thing, sign the same document, tell the same story, and if anything goes wrong, the female gets fired. It's an old story, but one that is repeated throughout history, even modern history. Everybody in a country needs someone to hate, and the communists, socialists and today our own politically correct intimidated society can hate very well, if not very properly. We cry and scream and throw flowers at the coffin of a woman who in fact knowingly married a man who loved someone else. It was common knowledge. She made him a laughing stock and aired her dirty linen in public on TV. She effectively left her kids to enjoy a sojourn with her latest Asian lover and got killed. We, well I didn't, went mad. Such is the fickleness of the great British public. This is the same Brit public who just pass by when the Muslims protest, which they're always doing, and turn the other cheek. The same Brits who hate our party because we touch on the truth of the matter, which they don't want to hear. The same Brits who don't vote because we are all the same. What planet are they on? Do they ever listen or watch anything other than Big Brother or fat people being hoisted around on winches? One of the comments from Monday was that although the listener enjoyed the news, he thought my comments on the Muslims being the plagues would not appeal to lefties. Well, thank you for that, but if any lefty is listening to the nationalist news, he deserves all he gets and more. As to our class system, north-south divide, whatever, it isn't dead. It's merely mummified and airs itself from time to time. Now, there is always another story from another angle, and if you deny anyone else the telling of it, then you are as bad as the people you hate. Those with closed and made-up minds are more dangerous than anyone. The thing about stories is that they grow larger with time, and the facts get distorted to suit the teller. It's human nature, and very much the nature of politics today. You'll never hear the same circumstances from even people in the same situation. For instance, the miners' strike. Two tales I know of, and who can tell what is the truth, as everyone sees the truth from a different angle. There is the poor bloody mining community, split through its ranks, the wicked owners, the even worse government and starving children and families. The other tale, running alongside but rarely mentioned and gleaned from a union man some years later by myself, was slightly different. The mines had become almost non-profit making, so many owners brought in expensive new machinery for their businesses. But the unions were too strong and called a strike, because some of their members would have been made redundant had the new machinery been adopted. And it all went very badly wrong. Now, whichever is right, whichever is wrong, putting events that happen solely at the door of one woman and a recently deceased one is not good manners and not good publicity for any person in politics. I'm not excusing what she and all the other Prime Ministers have got wrong, and in some cases, especially that of the successive Labour governments, we are still paying for. And I mean the massive immigration that started for the main part during the disastrous Blair years. Now that is what us nationalists should be whinging about, and a couple of non-winnable wars Labour started and didn't finish. What people who aren't near the corridors of power don't realise is that even if one ever became a Prime Minister, you would never act on your own. That is what the term government means. Dictator means acting alone. Prime Minister means just that. The First Minister for responsibility along with your fellow ministers. Maggie especially had the strength of the old guard against her in the end. The jobs for the boys' fellows, the pushers and the shovers, in short, the establishment. And I for one think that it was pushing her ambitions through this morass of men that turned on her in the end, that made her ill along with the death of her beloved husband. We can always rely on Marxists and nihilists who want to do away with any form of authority apart from their own, to become utterly venomous when one of their enemies dies. We nationalists have the same sort of thing in the media, and when we have tabletops there are always one or two idiots who delight in being as rude, obscene and sometimes violent as possible, because they can get away with it. Ignorance is not an excuse in my book, although it does seem endemic nowadays. So Mrs Thatcher, as she was then, is being blamed for the miners' strike, immigration, putting Brits closer to the EU and probably the sodding weather as well. Now consider the fact it was a Labour government that started the rot in the grammar school system, because Labour and its allies didn't want to educate anyone up to a level, they wanted to re-educate everyone down a rung or two. That's how they got more voters, through ignorance, not education, and in those days there were not quite so many Muslim immigrants to ingratiate themselves with. As one minister, Lord Adonis, aptly named, in 2007 made this public apology. One of Tony Blair's closest allies has admitted Labour's obsession with the comprehensive system has destroyed many good schools. Education Minister Lord Adonis conceded the closure of grammar schools in the 1960s and 1970s was a backward step that reinforced class divisions rather than helping those less well off. The comments are a stunning repudiation of the one-size-fits-all education policies which Labour clung to for decades and many MPs still support. His words effectively admit that Labour has failed an entire generation of schoolchildren. Need I repeat it? No, I don't think so. So if ever I get to be Prime Minister, which is just about as possible as snow in hell, I'll open all the still workable pits up with their new machinery still down there and put convicts to work in them. Or else our media would shriek, "Minister reopens mines and puts Brits down to work as slaves." Can you just hear it from the papers, the pit towns and the EHRC? Talk about moving with the times. The only time I'll lose my manners will be when the real bitch is dead, and I mean the Cherry Blair Witch. Then I'll be seen at the top of Big Ben waving a huge banner, "The Blair Witch bitch is dead." Until then, let a person who was a voted-in Prime Minister, unlike what we have now, for over a decade, rest in peace. Mind you, I'm only an ex-posh bird from down south, so what do I know? But it is still bad luck to speak ill of the dead, apart from the Blair bitch of course, but she's still alive, and living very well off the poor. Long live the yellow brick road. And finally, a Blue movie fan had some serious explaining to do after arrival at a hospital in China with a live eel stuck up his bum. The kinky 39-year-old was copying a scene from an X-rated film when he lost grip of the slippery eel in Shundi, Guangdong province. After finding he couldn't get it out, the unmarried man rushed to the nearest accident and emergency unit for medical assistance. He told the astonished medics, "Please help me, the eel is moving through my body." A team of surgeons spent hours removing the 20-inch Asian swamp eel, which weighed more than half a kilo. The eel was simply trying to find its way out, explained one of the medical team. It was still alive when we got it out, but it died soon afterwards, which was probably a mercy. This was a particularly idiotic stunt and could have caused him serious injury. Eels have small but very sharp teeth, the police spokesman said. We are aware of what happened and the 39-year-old man will be interviewed over alleged animal cruelty. A vicar previously claimed a potato got stuck up his bottom after he fell onto a vegetable. A vicar previously claimed a potato got stuck up his bottom after he fell onto the vegetable while hanging curtains in the nude. This presenter says, potatoes aside, I thought it was only the Danes that did this sort of disgusting thing with live eels. My remedy would have been to let it eat its way through his body until it reached freedom. What a revolting piece of work. He should have died. I personally don't mind what humans do in their efforts to get pleasure, but it should never involve animals, fish or reptiles. In short, anything that is not human, vegetable or mineral. It simply ain't right, but then again I'm surprised he fell short of the air hose up the bum trick, which would have really given him gas. You have been listening to The World at 8. I am Lynn Mozart and I wish you all a very good night.